Welcome, everyone. We're thrilled to have you here today and so excited to have such a great turnout for the first educational session that's open to the public hosted by The Curve. We hope to offer these sessions once a quarter moving forward, and we'll look for your feedback to see what's valuable and how we can best serve you. By way of introduction, my name is Pat Burgess. I'm the Executive Director of The Curve. If this is your first exposure to The Curve, I'd like to take a moment to share a bit about our mission. The Curve exists to give forward-thinking police leaders the most current and creative ideas about how to lead most effectively. And we also want to provide you the resources that can help you implement these ideas and modernize your cultures from the inside out. We call our philosophy one-by-one policing. So in the spirit of providing resources to forward-thinking leaders in policing, we have an esteemed panel here today made up of our founders that'll help guide the discussion. We're going to ask that the audience members engage and participate. You can submit questions, and that's really the purpose of our forum here, is to get your questions. Our esteemed panel of founders here that you see will introduce themselves as we go along, and they have questions that they'll prompt as well. So before we get started, I want to learn a little bit about you. So I'd like to open up a couple quick poll questions just to gauge who we have in the audience here. So Kaylin, if you wouldn't mind popping up those poll questions. First question is, tell us about yourself, specific around your role. And the second question is, how did you hear about The Curve? So give just a moment for folks to submit those poll questions. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for participating. So, of course, the main attraction today that probably most of you got your attention and most of you were attracted to was Simon Sinek. And Simon spearheaded this initiative from day one years ago. And Simon, I'll pass it over to you to just get us going here and tell us a bit about yourself and why you got this started.
Thanks, Pat, and thanks everyone for joining today. This all started post George Floyd, where as everyone can remember, the pressures and the narratives were overwhelming, and the anti-police sentiment was at an all-time high. I called some chiefs and sheriffs that I knew just from over my years of work, just to check in on them as human beings. I mean, I knew them as friends. And I asked them how they were doing, and clearly they were not doing well. And these are good chiefs and good sheriffs, some of whom are on this call today, who were as appalled by the events of that day as most Americans, but also were feeling the brunt of the sentiment from the country, which was a hard thing to balance. And so we decided to get on a Zoom call, much like this one, and they invited some of their friends. And there was a dozen, maybe nearly 24 of us, and it was like therapy. It was sort of amazing and cathartic, and everybody got to be real in a safe space. And it was so effective, so good, we did it again a few weeks later. And then we did it again a few weeks later. And then I think the third one, I asked the question, what's wrong with policing in America today? And we went around the room, and everyone gave a different answer. And I raised the question, how can we solve the problems of policing in America if we can't even identify what the problem is? But we did identify a pattern, that everything that everybody said that was the problem actually was linked to something bigger, that all the problems we talked about were linked to either the quality of leadership or the quality of culture in policing organizations in America today. And so we realized that if we wanted to bring policing into the modern day, we had to work on how we teach police how to lead and how we help those in leadership positions build robust, strong cultures where those who work in those organizations feel psychologically safe and trusting of their leaders and of each other. And I can tell you in my own practice of teaching leadership and learning about leadership, corporate America is very far ahead in trying to embrace new theories, reject old things that haven't worked. Military is pretty good, they're pretty amazing, they're pretty far ahead as well. And I have a look at policing as a profession, about 20 years behind. The kinds of things that have been talked about, the kinds of things that have been embraced and not yet moved aside from the old way of thinking. And so this is what we're committed to doing, which is helping move policing, culture, and leadership into the 21st century from the inside out. We're looking for the most forward-thinking chiefs and sheriffs from across the country who want to embrace this. So that's where we came from. With that, I'll stop, and I'll start taking your questions and the questions from my colleagues and coworkers here.
Yeah, so again, folks, you have the opportunity to submit questions, and we encourage everyone to use that feature on Zoom. And in the meantime, we'll ask our esteemed panel of founders to get us started with some questions that they've come with. And I just ask each person from the panel here, if you could take a second to introduce yourself before posing your question, just so the audience knows who they're hearing from, that'd be great.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Shung. I currently serve as the Undersheriff for San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. Simon, you've been involved in this profession for a long time, and kind of in and out, a lot of observations. If you could give us your perspective on where it's at and more importantly, where it needs to go.
So one of the things that I think that I've seen change, which is very, very good, is the open-mindedness to even the discussion we're having. If I go back just a couple of years, I'd be in closed sessions with chiefs and sheriffs, and I would talk about the need for us to question how we teach leadership to those in policing, how we build modern-day policing cultures. And the amount of pushback that I would get, how defensive people were, was astonishing. And I would remember saying in these closed forums, look, I'm on your side. There's no press here. There's nobody. Like, if we can't be honest with ourselves, then this is all for naught. And I have to say, the open-mindedness has changed. Like, people are way more open that there are things we can do better, that we don't have to be defensive, especially amongst ourselves. And the number of people who are willing to question some of the sacred cows, I think is good. So I think that we're starting to see that the times are ripe. So I think it's very exciting, and I'm very proud of the fact that we've continued to beat the drum, and others are now beating it with us. Oh, and you asked me where I think it should go. Sort of part two of that one. That's the big one, right? Which is, we don't really teach people how to lead as they make their way through the ranks in policing organizations. If you look at corporate America, the military is the best example. Like, you have to take all kinds of coursework and training, because when you go to an academy, for example, they teach you how to be a police officer or a deputy. Like, you learn how to do the job. Well, when you get promoted, who's teaching you how to do the job of leadership? And that's why we get so many managers and not leaders, is because nobody taught them how to do the job. So the best they can rely on is their guessing, or whoever led them, they're maybe copying them. And what I've learned about great leaders, regardless of their rank, is they are all consider themselves students of leadership. They're constantly reading books, reading articles, watching talks, talking to other people about leadership. They're constantly taking in how to continue to advance their education. I think the profession of policing needs to do a much better job of formalizing, both from the academy and all the way through the ranks, basics of leadership, how to listen, how to have an effective confrontation. And I don't mean in the field. I mean, like, what happens when you disagree with your boss? What happens when you need to give harsh feedback to someone? Are you giving it in a way that they're listening, or are they just shutting down and rejecting you? Do you know how to build a culture where you can foster psychological safety? And I hear it all the time, where cops trust each other, like when shit goes down and everybody calls for backup, then of course they all have each other's back, right? We know that. But I'm just talking about the daily grind, the daily machinations. Like, people may like the people they work with, but do they trust the people they work with? And the number of rank and file who report that they absolutely trust leadership, that leadership has their backs, is woefully small. Woefully small. And I think all of these are eminently solvable problems. They're all eminently solvable challenges if we teach how to lead and how to build culture.
And we have a question from Elizabeth Powers, who's asking, how would you address this framework in cultures that are corrupt or led by apathetic leaders or racist leaders? What advice do you have for people?
Hypothetically speaking?
Hypothetically.
Yeah. So, we can't change other people's behavior. And there's nothing we can do if somebody's closed-minded and somebody is rejecting of the new way of thinking, because let's be honest, the people who defend the status quo have benefited or continue to benefit from the status quo. That's why they defend it. They're not always bad people. They just, that's their framework. And so when you're in one of those situations, the only thing we can do is take responsibility for ourselves. So number one, let's be the leaders we wish we had. So if leadership is nothing to do with rank, that simply affords you authority. If leadership is the awesome responsibility to see those around us rise, are we taking personal responsibility for the people to the left of us, the people to the right of us, those in our care, those in our command, and even maybe somebody above us, believe it or not, which is we don't know the stresses and strains and the pressures on somebody who might be our boss. And maybe one of the reasons they're acting out is because they feel like they're flailing. So are we learning the skills of leadership to influence those around us? Of course, quitting is always an option. It's not what I think should be a first option. If you're truly in a highly toxic environment where it's truly aggressive and demeaning and degrading, then quitting is always an option. But those kinds of conditions are not the norm. They tend to be a little more on the edges that are truly toxic, which means there's opportunities to be the leaders which we had. And what you start to see is these pockets of magic start to happen. And at the very minimum, you're left alone because things are working fine in those groups. But what you start to see is there are ripples. And eventually, the person who is dysfunctional or a bad leader, eventually, believe it or not, the tail wags the dog. And this is the one thing that's magical about human beings and human culture, which is the power always belongs to the people. This is why dictators fear the people. They don't have fake elections, because everybody knows power is derived from the people. So when you start to have more and more people embracing good leadership, believe it or not, it puts overwhelming pressure on leadership to do the same. It takes a little more patience, but it is an amazing experience to watch happen.
Simon, we have a question from a new sergeant who is wondering, how can you go about fostering trust without appearing insincere or overly contrived?
It's a fair question. A friend of mine who's a Marine general, and he used to be in charge of all Marine Corps training, officer and enlisted. And he would say his test of a good leader is if you ask somebody how they're doing, that they actually care about the answer. So the easiest way to be sincere is to be sincere. We all have different personalities, and we don't want to read a script. And I'm always very cautious of leadership training or leadership coaches that tell us what we should say, but rather what the goal of the communication is. And it's okay for your own personality to show through. And so it's, how do you be sincere? You be sincere. If you care, then care. And if you don't care, pretending that you care is the thing that they'll eventually see through. And I think that's unfortunately, internally and externally, I think we're all used to hearing, police, corporate CEOs say things like, a Boeing aircraft is falling out of the sky and a door is flying off, because they didn't tighten the bolts. And then the first statement out of corporate is, our first priority is safety. Clearly it's not, so it's clearly not sincere, but it's the thing we have to say. Then, human beings are social animals. We're pretty smart. We're pretty attuned. We know they're full of it. I would rather somebody say, you just follow that example through, saying, safety should be our number one priority. Clearly, we have failed in some of these arenas for reasons we're getting to the core, because we want safety. We want our aircrafts to be the safest in the world, and it's clear that there is a gap that we have to address. We are aware what the gap is, and we are working on it. I'd rather somebody tells me that. At least it's honest, because we all know that the other one is full of it. So sincerity is just means just be honest. Just be honest, even if the truth is uncomfortable.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Doug Shoemaker, and I've been in policing for almost 34 years. Honored to be amongst this group of founding members of the Curve, and also the third vice president of ICP. Simon, specifically earlier, you mentioned culture and dealing with people above and below you. So as for those on the line that are police chiefs or executives, police leaders deal all the time with really complex and chaotic environments and what they might perceive as maybe a lack of support from those who we as chiefs or sheriffs might report to. What advice would you give that might provide some kind of source of inspiration to keep moving forward, to do the right thing, to advance the agency culture despite those challenges?
So it's such a good question, and you don't necessarily get to choose your city manager, your mayor, whoever, and they have their own agendas, especially if some of them are elected officials. They have their own agendas, and so the best source of support, quite frankly, is each other. I'm a great believer in peer groups. And when I talk about peer groups, I don't mean the annual conference where you all sort of like rub elbows and shake hands and high five each other. I'm talking about small scale group of people who come in with common purpose and common cause, where you have an opportunity to vent, ask advice, complain, cry, whatever's needed in this group of no more than 10, 5, 6, 7 trusted friends and colleagues. And they can be from across the country, by the way, or they can be from your community, but people who get it. And what you find is that that the courage comes from the knowledge that someone's got your back. I find this concept of courage fascinating, which is I don't believe that courage is a deep internal fortitude. You dig down deep and find the courage. I don't think that's true. I actually think for social animals like human beings, courage is external. Like a world famous trapeze artist would never try a brand new death-defying act for the first time without a net. It's the external thing, it's the net that provides the courage. And in our own lives, all we need is at least one person who says, you got this, I believe in you. No matter what happens, I will always be by your side. You are not going to be alone no matter what. When we just know that there's somebody who loves us and has our back, that if everything goes south, they will still be there for us. The amount of courage that we have, it's incredible. And even if the courage is not necessarily speaking truth to power, sometimes the courage is enduring something for a while, the ability to endure, just as long as we know we're not alone. And that's one of the things that I've learned from the Curve. And for some of you on this call who are in the Curve, you know this. We had one of our offsites. We had a Curve offsite and one evening, sitting by the fireplace with whiskey always helps. I opened up and said, these are some of my insecurities and things that I struggle with. And somebody else said, well, I'm struggling with this. And the conversations, the things that people opened up about were things that I have never heard chiefs or sheriffs ever share. They were deeply personal. They were deeply vulnerable. Not everybody spoke. It wasn't like we went around the room and everybody had to share. It wasn't that at all. It was those who wanted to did. And the people, I remember one guy in particular who never said a word, didn't speak, didn't contribute, and came up to me afterwards and said that was the most valuable thing he's ever been a part of, just to sit and hold space for others and to feel safe even though he didn't share. And so what we did was we created that catharsis, and the love that it produced amongst this group of people who were committed to common cause made us, I think all, and I won't speak for the people on this call, some of whom were there, but I think it gave us all a degree of greater courage to lean into some of the challenges that we're leaning into, to do the right thing, and even speak out against some of those people in our profession who think that we're crazy for even having these conversations. And the level of courage that I feel just from that room was dramatic. But it exemplified that, creating that safe space of people with common cause.
Simon, you mentioned earlier that the private sector is pretty far ahead in leadership. We have a question from John that asks, in your opinion, what are the primary obstacles that have led to this gap in effective leadership?
Yeah, I mean, the people on this call are better qualified to answer that than me. But from an outsider looking in, I don't think anybody just questioned the system. And when people did question the system, the answer they usually got was, that's the way we've always done it, or shut up and mind your own business. And as I said before, which is, the system benefited those who held positions of authority. It didn't necessarily benefit the rank and file, and it certainly didn't benefit the outside world. And so, unfortunately, and by the way, I see this in corporate America as well. Like the Boeing challenges, that started 20 years ago. The fact that doors are flying off planes, that didn't like happen last week. That's 20 years of a slow drip of substandard leadership and embracing the wrong theories of leadership. They're all ex-GE folks who idolized Jack Welch and believed money and shareholder were supreme and everything else suffers. And so, we see the same thing in policing. And so unfortunately, it takes scandal very often, or for something to break before there's a pressure that we have to change, even though many people know that that there has to be change. A few people get to become chief or sheriff and get to reject all the things that they've hated. Everyone on this call, I would imagine, is one of those people who's raising questions about how you came through the ranks and is now saying there has to be a new way, a different way, a better way. That's why you're here. That's why you're on this Lunch and Learn. That's why people join the Curve, is because they now have a position where they're like, this has to be different. And they're looking for counsel, support, and resources from each other. But I think there was never pressure, to be honest, to change. Not to mention the fact that there's no national body that governs what the future of policing should look like in America. We don't have a head of police for America. And so when you have 18,000 mostly small to medium-sized agencies, there's just not a lot of impetus. There's not a lot of pressure to change. So it takes something like George Floyd that was captured on camera and the subsequent scandals that have happened afterwards to apply that pressure. And by the way, it would be a waste to not capitalize on that pressure and do some good with it, which is what we are attempting to do, which is to leverage that pressure but take responsibility for ourselves. Like, the outside pressures are overwhelming, some of which is helpful, some of which won't be. Fixing these problems with legislation is not going to fix the problem. Police have to take responsibility for their own profession, to build a profession that they would be proud of and that they would want their children and their children's children to wear that badge.
Simon, you talked about trust in the context of interdepartmental. We have a question from Bruce that takes another lens at this, and Bruce asks, many police officers feel that they are in adversarial relationships with the people that they serve. What's the best way to address this?
When you say the people who serve, you mean the general public?
That's my interpretation, yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like any tense relationship, right? Which is, they think it's you and you think it's them. And what leadership means is, I'm going to go first. That's all it means. And whether the general population leads or we, the police, lead, it's a choice. It's more likely that the police have the opportunity to lead because for you, it's a daily occurrence. Most people don't interact with police on a daily basis. You interact with the general population on a daily basis. And so I think empathy, it always starts with empathy. The general population is not considering the pressures, fears, or anxieties that you have when you go to work. But we can have empathy for the pressures, fears, and anxieties they have when they interact with somebody in uniform. And in the Curve, we talk about a vision that we have, which is we imagine a world in which justice is administered with fairness, dignity, and respect. And I think that's a huge part of it, which is this idea of dignity, right? And treating people with dignity. And I'll give you an example. We all at the Curve also believe that that everything starts with purpose. And it started with our own group. I asked them, why do we have police? Like, what is the purpose of police? And the best that people could say is, to serve and protect. They told me something that was written on the door of their, police car, or to enforce the law. Well, you call yourselves law enforcement and that you enforce the law, but it's one piece of what you do. It's not all of what you do. That's definitely not your purpose. That's just one of the things you do. So we came up with a purpose. The purpose of police is to protect the vulnerable from harm. And sometimes those who need protection are victims of crimes. Sometimes those who need protection are the criminals themselves. And what do I mean by that? Right? Let's say you're chasing someone down for good reason, right? And they are not vulnerable, that's for sure. In fact, they are threatening. And then you get them and you put them in handcuffs. In that moment, they switch from being the threat, and now they are in handcuffs. They are now vulnerable. Do we treat them with dignity once they are no longer a threat to themselves or others? Or do we still treat them like they're a threat? every single cop on this call has had the experience where, let's say you pulled someone over and you see that they're driving on an expired license or an expired registration, or they've got a warrant or wherever it is, and you've got to either take them in or tow their car. Like, that's what the regs say, that's what you got to do, that's what the law says, that's what you got to do. Every single person has had this experience where you said, hey, listen, I got to tow your car. Do you want to call a family member quickly so they can come get it? Because otherwise it's going to cost you more and it's going to be difficult. Knowing full well that whoever you've pulled over probably is struggling with bills or whatever, you know, or if they've got a warrant out for them, there's some other struggle. That's treating someone with dignity. And even though they may be guilty of a crime and you take them to jail, they have said thank you to you. And that's what we mean. That's what we mean. So if we can learn, if police can learn that you're dealing with the general population and how you show up every day with the purpose to protect the vulnerable from harm, and how you get good at knowing when to adjust that. Like, someone's a threat until they're in handcuffs, now they're vulnerable. Somebody who's struggling financially, you've got to tow their car, they're vulnerable. How do you help them? And I think over the course of time, the more police, the more of those in policing who can embrace the mentality and really embrace the purpose, we'll start to see a sea change. And I believe that the aggression that you get towards you will in fact change, even if it's only just in your community, because those are the people you're serving. But somebody has to go first, and why not us?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jack Colley, and I'm the chief of police here in Castle Rock, Colorado. Simon, a lot of what we're talking about today circles back to culture. Can you go over why is culture so important? And then secondly, what's the difference between culture by design and culture by default?
So let's define what culture is. I think we can't build something or make something or design something unless we know what it is. My favorite definition of culture comes from a Marine, but culture equals values plus behavior. So lots of organizations write their values on the wall. The question is, are they behaving consistent with their values? So if you write them on the wall, but you don't hold yourself or your cops accountable to those values, you have a weak culture. If you've never defined your values and you're behaving willy-nilly, you have a weak culture. If you're defining them defensively, like you're correcting behavior, but you've never offered values to offer guidance before the behavior, you have a weak culture. So values must be defined. Values are not aspirational. And sometimes some values go in trends, right? Like every corporation has sustainability on their values. Why? Because of global warming, right? Or the number of corporations that suddenly put diversity on their values post George Floyd. Now, they don't actually believe in it. They just have to do it because it's, it's fashionable. You have to actually believe the stuff that you write as a value. It can't just be aspirational or public relations. And values, the way I define values, is values are the behaviors that you perform when you're operating at your natural best. So when all cylinders are firing, when you're in flow, when things are working, when trust is high, you'll see these values show up. It's how your culture operates when you're operating at your natural best, and now you want to work hard to make that happen as often as possible. So a culture by design means that we articulate our values, we articulate the kind of culture we want. And Jack, you know this better than most because you came into your organization with a broken culture. You said, this is the culture I want. You articulated it publicly. You said, this is what I want to achieve. And you held people accountable who didn't obey it. But more importantly, you promoted and rewarded those who exemplified the behaviors that you wanted to get the culture you wanted. And so incentive is a huge part of it. I'm tired of people saying we incentivize performance. You cannot incentivize performance. It doesn't exist. You can only incentivize behavior. And so are your incentives and reward structures consistent with the behaviors that you want? So if you want people to solve problems, if you want your cops to be innovative, then you cannot make the primary incentive or reward structure how many tickets they write or how many arrests they make. Those numbers are important to track, of course, But if that's the primary way in which you're rewarding and recognizing your cops, then everything you say about what you want will never happen, because they'll do the thing that gets the reward, obviously. Obviously. The idea of a toxic team member, we reward these cops too much, right? So I go back to the Navy SEALs. I had the opportunity to work with SEAL Team 6, which is, as you all know, the best of the best. And I asked the director of training of SEAL Team 6, how do you choose who gets onto SEAL Team 6? And he drew an XY axis. He drew a graph for me. On the vertical axis, he wrote performance. How good are you at your job? On the horizontal axis, he wrote trust. What kind of person are you? Clearly, nobody wants to work with this person, the low performer of low trust. Clearly, everybody that wants to work with this person, the high performer of high trust. What they learned is this person, the high performer of low trust, is a toxic team member. And they would rather have a medium to low performer of high trust over a high performer of low trust. And this is the highest performing organization on the planet. And they value trust more than raw performance. And we think about our own organizations where we have incredibly high performers that nobody really likes or trusts. And the chiefs know. They say, why aren't you doing something about that guy? And they're like, I know, but he's so good, right? And we give it an excuse. Well, what those people do is they break cultures. They destroy trust. We either have to coach them, and if they're uncoachable, no matter how good they are, we ask them to leave the organization, and you see everybody else's performance rise. And at the risk of beating a dead horse here, think of culture of an organization like the character of a person. Like, I know that you're good at your job, Jack, but because I know who you are and I know your values, I know your character. I know you have ethics and standards that you live by, and I know you strive to do the right thing. I know what your character is, and it's your character that makes me trust you, and it's your character that makes you predictable. Culture is the exact same thing as character. Culture of a company are the things that I can rely on, the things that I know are consistent, that make you predictable. It's also the reason I trust you, because I know there are certain immutable things like your values. And a culture by design is literally that. You do it by design. By default means whatever we get is whatever we get. We hire somebody because they're tall and muscular, but we don't care what kind of person they are. You're going to get a culture by default.
Simon, we'll take a couple more questions from the audience here. And some of these are similar questions. So if I skipped your question, I'm hoping you found the connection in something Simon already said, but this seems to be a new topic. What are your thoughts on teaching culture change in less than 2 hours is one kind of part of the question. I saw another related question coming in the chat on what resources do you suggest people tap into to build their leadership capability from a development standpoint?
So culture change from a 2-hour seminar. So any kind of education, there's two things. There's intensity and there's consistency. So think of it like going to the dentist, right? We do intensity every 6 months, right? You go to the dentist and you get your teeth cleaned. That's what you're supposed to do. We do consistency every single day, 2 minutes in the morning and 2 minutes in the evening. Now, things that are intense are predictable, fixed in time, easily measured. I know what time I'm going to the dentist. I know when I'm going. I know exactly what the results are going to be. My teeth are going to feel all smooth and shiny, right? And I have to do that. I have to do that twice a year. But consistency actually matters more, right? It's what does brushing your teeth for 2 minutes do? It does nothing unless you do it every day for twice a day. What if I'm too tired to brush my teeth, and can I skip a night? Yes, you can. How many nights can I skip? I don't know, and neither does any dentist. Just not too many. And so when you talk about, can you transform your culture with a 2-hour seminar? Of course not. But you need that intensity. You need that level of education. And you have to take some of those principles and you have to try them and practice them. And it's the mundane, small, little things that happen on a daily basis that you will see. It's the consistency that will transform a culture. Let me give you some silly little things that have profound impact over the course of time, like brushing your teeth, right? Ban cell phones in conference rooms. Ban cell phones in any kind of meeting. And what you'll find is over the course of time, trust will increase because we're not distracted, we're holding space for each other, and we're being present for each other. Saying good morning to people as you walk past them. Stupid, silly. Checking in with people, asking them how they're doing, and being curious. There was a question from the sergeant before about sincerity. Like, how are you? It's been a hard day. Why? What's going on? Oh, my dad's in the hospital. Oh, that sucks. Okay, well, I'll see you later. Like follow up, make people feel like you actually care. And it's these tiny little things that by themselves do nothing. But over the course of time, talking about the things that you're struggling with. Hard day this week. My kids, sick, a little more stressed, not been sleeping this well this week. Please be a little more patient with me as I'm dealing with some stuff from home. Thanks very much. And the more the leader sets the tone on a regular basis, the more you'll find that the rank and file will copy the behavior. We literally lead the way. Like we will follow our leader. So if we express that kind of stuff, then our rank and file will do it too. And it's these little innocuous things done on a daily basis that you learned in that 2-hour seminar that really have the transformative impact. The seminar itself won't keep your teeth healthy, but you still need to go to the dentist.
Simon, you touched on the topic when you were talking about Jack Cawley earlier and how he came into a department and had a turnaround assignment, if you will. There seems to be several questions along that theme, so perhaps we can double down on that. What do you suggest for how a leader can come into a situation where the team has experienced poor leadership in the past and they need to correct that?
I'd like to defer to some of the folks on this call. Every single person on this call from the curve has had that experience or is going through that experience. And so I think they're better qualified to answer some of these questions to talk about what the real struggle is, what's working, what doesn't work, and your various forms of various places in transformations. Derek, I know you're in a relatively new job. Chris, you're in a relatively new job. Jack, you've been doing it a little longer in your transformation. So maybe if you can share 1 or 2 stories, that would help. It's more feet on the ground.
So, hello, everybody. My name is Derek Miller. I'm the chief of police in Irving, Texas. And I think that I would offer what you just mentioned a few minutes ago, understanding what your values are, your personal values are, and then instituting those behaviors to build on those things. That's how you change the culture. It's hard work. It's difficult. And sometimes you're going to get pushback. But I think what you have to have as a leader is a crystalline idea of what your personal values are, making sure that those values are aligned with the organization's values, and then ensuring that behaviors, same thing that Simon just said, rewarding those behaviors, talking about those behaviors and those values until the people who you're working with, their ears are bleeding. Not just a picture on a wall or a sign on the wall, continually talking about what our purpose are, what our values are. And those people who are early adopters will come along. And then those who are not will either self-select or go away. But it's in my view, that's the short answer to
Derek, can you give a specific example of a value that you have worked hard to implement, a behavior that you've worked hard to implement, that you've started to see that transformation and how you got there?
The absolute mission of a department, and guys see their bosses in briefings, and then they go out into the world and they do their jobs. And I think one of the things that we've been able to do is to actually talk to them about what we're supposed to be doing. And quite frankly, under the idea of protecting the vulnerable from harm, one of the things that when you're dealing with low performer or you're dealing with people who are just trying to get to the end of their shifts, talking about what your job is. And our job is to go out and to proactively protect the community in which we serve. And in so doing, treat everyone we come into contact with professionalism, dignity, and respect. And those who are treating people in ways that they ought not be treating people, those who are just collecting a paycheck will hear that constant drum of treating people with dignity and respect, protecting the vulnerable from harm. And to those who think that that's a tagline or cheesy, they will self-select, they will go away, they will get tired. But for those who recognize their calling and understand that this is a noble profession, that will be the rhythm in which they will go out and they will work. And so to answer your question, to take a culture, an organization where we just don't know what we're doing, or we're just trying to get through a shift, you know, keep restating those values, keep restating what those behaviors are being expected of you. And then that's how eventually, in my view, culture will change.
Hey, before we jump to the next panelist question, there's a number of follow-up questions on something you mentioned there, Derek. You referenced early adopters, and Simon, there's several questions in the Q&A here that relates to early adopters. The core of it is, does your approach to early adopters and the law of diffusion, does it apply in policing?
The simple answer is yes. The law of diffusion and early adopters applies to any population of human beings. The law of diffusion of innovation, or the concept of early adopters, comes from the law of diffusion of innovations. Very simple concept. Most people have heard at least some of the language. You've heard of a bell curve. What the law of diffusion says is that all populations, regardless of their size, sift across a standard deviation, a bell curve. In any population, if you've got high performers, you've got low performers, you've got an average, always, right? It's a relative scale. What the law of diffusion tells us is that the first 2.5% of any population are your innovators. These are your big idea people, your Elon Musks, your Steve Jobs, the people who sort of lead the way in thinking. Then you have your early adopters, which are about the next 12, 13% of your population. These people have a risk tolerance for change. They're willing to invest time, energy, or money to be a part of something that reflects their own values and beliefs. They're willing to take risk. They stand online for 2 hours to see a new Star, 2 hours, so 24 hours to see a new Star Wars movie, where you can just go 2 weeks later and just buy a ticket and go in. But for them, to stand there for 24 hours is worth it. It's some sort of a reflection of their own values and beliefs. Then you have your early majority, the first 34%. Then you have your late majority, the next 34%, and the last 16% are your laggards. Laggards, the only reason they make any change is because they have no choice anymore. The majority is more cynical and more practical than your early adopters. Their risk tolerance for change is lower. What's in it for me? Will I get my money back if things go wrong? If something goes sideways, will I get in trouble? Those are the kinds of things you hear from majority. And what the law of diffusion tells us is that in order to create mass market success or mass market acceptance for an idea or behavior or whatever it is, in other words, if you want to change a culture, you want it to affect mass market, the whole culture. That's the majority. What we usually do is we aim our efforts at the majority, but it doesn't actually work. We give big PowerPoint presentations and we talk about what the importance of something is. But in reality, the people who change a culture are the early adopters, because the majority will not try something new until somebody else has tried it first. And if you can get between 15 and 18% market penetration in any population, there's a social phenomenon happens called a tipping point, and it just goes. And so if you're doing cultural transformation, though you want to be very public about what you're trying to do, you don't force everyone to do the thing you want to do. What you do is, just as Derek talked about, which is you reinforce over and over and over again, and you recognize in the reward those people who are trying it out, who are willing to take the risk. Even if it's imperfect, you reward the effort, not necessarily the perfect outcome. And what starts to happen is more and more people, more and more early adopters pile on, and the majority is sort of in wait and see mode, and eventually you get a critical mass and everybody else joins in. And the people who find that abhorrent and they hate the new system, as Derek said, they either convert or they self-select out of the organization. And what you end up getting is a group of people who feel like they're contributing to the culture that they originally signed up for. Most cops, I think, sign up because they are somewhat idealist. They do want to serve. And it's the profession that beats that idealism and service-mindedness out of them, I think, very often. And for those that really want that, and you want cops that believe that, you recruit to it, you incentivize and reward to it, and you build a culture around it. And the law of diffusion is the most effective way to do it. Otherwise, you're just forcing people and pushing people. And the minute you're out, it'll swing right back again. That's just force of personality holding the culture together. That's not actually culture change.
So in the event everyone hasn't connected that, the name of our organization, The Curve, is based upon what Simon just spoke about. We are looking for those early adopters and hopeful that this is that you're among that group. Okay, let's go back to the panel for another question.
So my name is Doreen Jokerst, and I'm the Chief of Police at the beautiful University of Colorado Boulder. I've been in the policing profession a little over 26 years and 6 years here at Boulder. Simon, my question for you, you really spoke to, it's going to be on change management and the law of diffusion. So what I'd like to do is kick it over to one of the panelist questions that I'll read to you. It comes in from Amy Perez, and she said, Simon, given your expertise in organizational dynamics and the concepts you really truly coined on the circle of safety, how can law enforcement leadership address and transform the eat their own culture where officers may perceive sometimes that their peers are actually their competitors and their teammates rather than solidarity and mutual support?
Amy, you're talking exactly about the kind of culture that we see too pervasive in policing today, which is we may like each other, we may get along with each other, but do we deeply trust each other? And I'm not talking about, officer in need. I'm talking about just the daily job, and then that translates to do we trust our leadership? In this case. I think being open about it. I think the first thing, it's like any relationship. Like if you think about a personal relationship, when there is a tension, the first thing you have to do is point at the tension and give it a name. And I think the first thing a chief has to do, or anybody, quite frankly, inside the organization, doesn't have to be the chief, but it's more efficient if it comes from leadership, is to simply say, ours is a profession that is traditionally dog eat dog, that you don't even know if the person next to you is your competitor or your compadre. Though that may be the norm in our profession, I do not want that to be the norm in our organization. And I have some ideas about the things that I want to do to change that. And I'm looking to hear from you as well, where you think we can do better. And here are some of the things that I'm going to be trying, only some of which will be successful. And to simply declare the kind of culture you want, the kind of culture you reject, some of the things that you're going to try, because what ends up happening if you claim you have all the answers, the minute the first thing doesn't work or work as well, people are going to be all over it and be like, see, doesn't work. Old way's better. And so simply to say it's a journey. And it's like, I'm going to get into shape. Not everything I'm going to do, I'm going to enjoy. Not everything I'm going to do is going to work. But damn it, we're going to change this culture to be a culture that we want to come to, not that we're forced to come to. So I think the first thing to do is to give it a name, address it, and then start making the effort to do that, to actually chip away at it. I think chipping away is actually more effective. You can do little things and some slightly bigger things, but sort of wholesale upending everything all at once is actually more threatening to people because that's too sudden change. I keep hearing this thing from change management consultants. People fear change. No, they do not. People fear sudden change. Gradual change people do not fear. Think of it like revolution versus evolution. Revolution is sudden and aggressive, and there's always a counter-revolution. Evolution is a little more slow, sometimes harder to see, and once the changes happen, there ain't no going back. And there are some well-intentioned chiefs who come into a new job and they treat it like a revolution, and they start firing people, and they start upending everything, and all that does is produce fear and rejection. And unless you have an unbelievably toxic environment, that is not the way to start a job. The way to start a job is, hey, I'm the new guy. I need to learn. I want to listen. I'm going to ask everybody questions. I'm going to go on a little listening tour to find out what I'm dealing with. Let me tell you my intention for the kind of culture I want to build here. And to go on the process of sometimes completely upending some things, pieces, but otherwise introducing things slowly and surely, and also relying on that early adopter community, the ones who embrace change sooner. And if other people are slow to embrace, that's fine. Let people come at their own pace. But change is possible. Sometimes we just have to be a little more patient with the pace of the change, but you tend to find that it goes like this. But when you come in and try and make it go like this, it sort of collapses a lot quicker, or at least it makes itself more vulnerable. I hope that answers the question.
Simon, Michaela points out that a big part of change is who we bring in, who we attract and recruit into policing. Any advice for how to build a team of young and diverse talent into our policing agencies?
Yeah, I mean, I think policing for the past, 15, 20 years have sort of, if you look at our nation as a whole, I think has over-indexed on rugged individualism, Marlboro Man kind of thing. And we've forgotten about cooperation. We've heroized CEOs, for example, and we've forgotten about the teams. And we're suffering as a result of it. You can see our nation fractured, and everybody's trying to be a hero. And I think policing has made some similar things as well. I completely lost my train of thought. Remind me the question that will get me going.
About recruiting top talent.
Recruiting, thank you. So I think the manner in which we've recruited has gone a little bit off balance, right? So let's start with the name law enforcement. Most in this profession say that they are in law enforcement. That is actually not true. Enforcing the law is some of what you do. It's not all of what you do. And clearly, most policing organizations look completely different from the FBI, for example. Law enforcement might be some big umbrella, but there is something here called the profession of policing. And the profession of policing includes law enforcement. It also includes other things. So I think number one is we have to start saying that we are in the profession of policing, because if we continue to say that we are in law enforcement, what we're doing is attracting people who want to enforce the law. Like, that's who you're going to get. Right? The profession of policing is different. We can define it however we want to define it, of this profession of nobility and service and protecting the vulnerable from harm and imagining a world in which justice is administered with fairness, dignity, and respect, right? That we can build that profession. So number one, and by the way, it hasn't always been called law enforcement. Although we haven't found any articles on it, we sort of did an informal our own informal research with a whole bunch of chiefs who've been in the business a long time. And the best we can figure out is that it was the LA riots, that prior to LA riots, it was policing, and then post LA riots, it became law enforcement. So number one, I think we need to return to the profession of policing, and law enforcement is simply one of the things you do. That's number one. Number two, look at your recruiting videos. Are you making your recruiting videos excessively exciting? High-speed chases, bashing down doors, guns drawn, guys wearing, camouflage, even though they're in a city. Do you have too much of that imagery up front on your posters and your videos? Because that's who you're attracting. And so did we over-index on that kind of personality who's looking for that kind of excitement on a daily basis, which means they're going to go looking for it. So I think rejiggering the recruitment videos and how we talk about it. You can have some of that imagery in there because that is part of the job, but is it the primary part of the job? Is it the thing you want to put first? So I think how we do that, because you want to get the kind of people for your culture, you want to recruit the kind of people for your culture. So just as you reward the behavior you want in your culture, you should be showing imagery of that recruits the kind of person that you want in your culture, and talk very loudly about what kind of culture you're building, and we want people who belong here. So simply being very clear about expectations, being very clear, words really do matter, images really do matter, and recognizing that your recruiting is working, and you're going to get the thing that the video or the poster shows. So show the right thing.
All right. Well, I think we have time for one more question here, and I want to go to Matt Davis's question because I think it's a great one to close on. In most policing agencies, there's if you're an empathetic leader, you're viewed as weak. What's the best way to dispel this point of view of coworkers?
So there's a difference between, okay, so this sort of overlaps on sort of like empathy, vulnerability, all those kind of themes, right? Which is, we think that if we express any kind of empathy or self-doubt of any sorts, that makes us weak, and then we're going to lose credibility, we're going to lose authority, and that's why we have to act tough all the time, because that's the only way that we can maintain our rank and position, and people will take us seriously and do as we say. Nothing could be further from the truth. Let me show what does matter is confidence in your empathy, confidence in your vulnerability. Let me give you an example. Here is what vulnerability looks like with no confidence. Hey, our policing organization, like, I don't even know if I know how to fix this. Like, I know I want to change something, but I don't think I have the skills to change this culture and how we need to do it. And I need so much help to do this. I don't even know if I can do this alone, right? That will not inspire confidence from your rank and file, because you're expressing self-doubt and no confidence. Now let me show you what that looks like with confidence. So here's one thing I know. I want to change our culture from this to this. Here's the thing. I don't know how to do this all myself. I don't have all the answers, and I'm going to need a lot of help because trust me, I do not know how to do this alone. So you're going to either help me or you're not going to help me. What I'm looking for is people to help me because I don't know how to do it myself. Same self-doubt, and the same admission that I can't do it alone. The difference is you do it with absolute confidence. Empathy is the same, which is, hey, listen, I want people to care about me. I don't want to come to work and feel like someone's going to stab me in the back. So that's how I'm going to treat you, right? And so when I ask you, are you okay? If I try and put myself in your shoes, if you think that sounds weak, well, let's see how the opposite feels to you. Do you want me to care about you? Or want me to pretend that I care about you? So I just think owning a lot of this stuff, just being confident in this stuff, is most of it. It's not the vulnerability, it's not the empathy, it's the way we treat the vulnerability and treat the empathy. It's how we present the vulnerability and present the empathy. But if you just do it because you believe in it fundamentally, and you know it's the right thing to do and you're super confident about these things, then people are attracted to the confidence, not the display of confidence.
Well, that time went quick. We had a very engaged audience here, so thanks everyone for engaging. Thank you for the panel and founders of the Curve for joining here, and Simon, thank you for all of your insights. A few quick housekeeping items before we close. First off, we're going to do these on a quarterly basis. At least that's our goal. So would ask that you bring a friend next time. We want to expand the word and get the word out there to folks that fall into that early adopter category. So if you have a friend that's a progressive leader in policing, please bring them along or forward the invite. We'll make sure we come back to each of you that have registered for today for our next webinar. Secondly, LinkedIn. Chris is going to post in the chat here our LinkedIn page. That's where you're going to find the latest and greatest information from the Curve. We're going to post, we have a bunch of videos and short clips for education that we'll be pushing out over the next several weeks and ongoing. So I'd encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn. That's the best way to stay up to date with current events that we're hosting and other educational opportunities. And then would ask that you keep an eye out for a survey as well. We're going to hit you up for some feedback here just so we can know what works here and what's valued to you and what we can do to make this more valuable moving forward. And then finally, we have a very exciting announcement today, and this hits some of the questions that I saw coming in the chat. Apologize that we didn't have time to get to all of the questions, and we'll do our best to try to get to more next time. But one of the things that came up in the chat is, hey, what can we do for development, for education? And really excited to announce a special offering that Simon Sinek and the Optimism Company have just announced, which is Salute to Service, where they will be offering 75% off of their learning assets to first responders. And would encourage you, and I think we can post that link up in here as well, Chris, if you don't mind. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining. And Simon, I'll turn it over to you for final remarks.
Thank you. Yes, everything on our website, or I think most things on our website. If you're in this case, if you're a cop, you have 75% off all of our learning. Somebody asked about resources before. And again, LinkedIn, take those resources, take those videos. We're going to take some of the questions that you answered. We're going to go back and make some more videos about them so that we can put them out there. And we want to be a source for some of these resources for you. And we're looking for community. Please, start building those circles. We are building our own at the Curve. We've become sort of close friends and confidants in each other. Call somebody you've known for a long time in the business and say, hey, let's find 5 or 6 folks like us, and let's just talk monthly. Let's just get on a Zoom and talk monthly. I can't impress on you how important and cathartic and educational and valuable those closed communities are. Every great leader I know is a part of one of those communities. Thank you so much for coming. One of the things that I know is that we're talking about what the future of policing could look like, but I know that policing will not modernize if it weren't for the chiefs and sheriffs and rank and file and everybody who believes in the future of this profession. If you didn't show up today, and regardless of your rank, you've clearly shown up because you believe that there's positive things that can happen, and there's good change to be done. And so it is with deep, deep, deep love and gratitude that I thank you for being a part of this today. And I can guarantee you, if we work together and take care of each other, we will see positive change. And the best part about it is the general population will see it and feel it. this will become a profession that people will be. We're going to completely change the way that policing is viewed in this country. And by the way, that means for those who put on the uniform as well. I want them to feel psychologically safe every day they go to work. And I don't mean about vests and guns and, what I mean is like that they deeply trust the cops they work with and they trust the leaders they work for. With that, take care of yourself, take care of each other. We'll do another one of these again real soon. And thanks to my friends here who are all the co-founders of the Curve with me. Couldn't do this without you. Love you guys.